Carol, you want to get us started?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. This is Carol Semrat. Welcome to the webinar. We're excited to have you with us today. Chicago SHRM is pleased to have AGB Investigative Services as a strategic partner, and we thank them for hosting and presenting today's webinar. As a response to the workplace shootings in Aurora earlier this year, and to honor the victims this year, Chicago SHRM is offering programs that address issues of workplace disruption and violence. Next slide, please. I want to share with you that we do have some upcoming events on October 12th. There we go. On October 12th, we've got a workshop, Navigating Employee Relations Cases Successfully. And on September 17th, we have a roundtable presented by AGB, HR Leadership's Role in Sustaining a Safe Working Environment. Next slide, please. And I do want to share with you that we have our annual conference coming. It's called Elevate. It's on October 10th this year. We have early bird pricing. This offer ends on August 19th. Members can register for $179, non-members for $279, and we're offering some special pricing this year of $330 for a combined non-member attendance plus a one-year membership to Chicago SHRM. That represents $100 savings, which is really terrific. So I hope that I'll be able to see you at the conference. I do want to remind you that today's program qualifies for one SHRM PDC and one HRCI recertification credits. Following this program, the program IDs will be distributed to you via email. So at this point, let me turn this over to Tafer. She's the VP of Marketing and Strategic Partnerships for AGB, and she will introduce Johnny R.C. Tyler and Anita Clayton. Take it away, Tafer.
Thank you so much, Carol. We really appreciate it. Again, my name is Tafer Hamed. I am the VP of Marketing for AGB Investigative Services. AGB stands for Always Giving Back. We are a full-service security firm based here right in Chicago, although our capability and reach is national. Some of our core services, as you can see to the right, we provide active shooter training for Fortune 100 clients, as well as schools and nonprofits, fingerprinting, background checks. We are the largest security contractors for physical security for community policing in Chicago, as well as CHA. And Walmart for Chicagoland locations. We provide security training, aerial drone surveillance, and cyber security. Some of our awards and recognition, we are one of the fastest growing businesses considered by Inc. 5000 and Crain's Fast 50. We are the only African American security company in the nation to have ISO 9001-2015 certification, which means that we have proper processes and quality control measures in place. So I will go ahead and introduce Anita Clayton. She's our Director of Human Resources, as well as Johnny Tyler. Dr. Tyler is our Chief Training Officer for the Always Giving Back Institute, the 501c3, which is connected to AGB. Take it away, Mr. Tyler.
So, thank you all for joining us today, and we're very happy to be with you. Just want to go over the objectives for this webinar, what we hope to accomplish. We will, at this point, tell you what we are going to talk about. We'll talk about it, and then at the end, we'll summarize. We'll just tell you what we've said. So we will be looking at the insider threats, and those insider threats often are made possible through what's identified as rogue employees, individuals who may actually be alive and well with the company at that time. Then you have active threats, and these are individuals that can not just become a challenge to the internal staff and administration, but also customers as well. Then you have your negligent hiring, and we put this in because the ramifications of a bad hire. You'll find that the diligence of your background screening, we'll talk about that a little bit later, is very important, because what is known now and what's made available through social media and other other platforms that can be researched are very critical. Negligent hiring is now leading to abundant and growing lawsuits. Proper screening is going to be discussed, as well as the human resources responsibility in training and development, and also its development of policies and the implementation thereof. Next slide. So as you can see, the bad hire can affect not just the team and the business as well as the bottom line, but it can also affect lives. And so in this webinar, we're going to talk about some of those common risk factors and how we can avoid those.
So let's start with the bad hire. There are times an organization determines an employee is not a good fit for the team due to their misconduct or disruptive behavior. Behaviors that are not detected during the pre-employment process. And so you want to know, what can you do? For instance, when organizations witness the act of a rogue employee, which are those employees that impose active threat to your organization, rogue employees can be your biggest nightmare because their behavior is unpredictable and aberrant. Rogue employees can be dishonest and mischievous and behave in ways that are unexpected, making it difficult to detect. However, an organization does have the ability to implement effective security measures to minimize such threats. So let's review some security measures to mitigate the risk of rogue employees. One is to conduct a risk assessment to analyze potential threats in your organization. Then you want to develop a security policy and back up your policy with training. This should be for all employees. That can also be repeated as a refresher course when needed. Don't forget about physical security. Never underestimate the advantage of having the presence of a security officer. You want to monitor activity and investigate suspicious or unusual activity. Oftentimes, when employees are aware that surveillance is present, they are less likely to behave unruly. And then last but not least, you want to institute a post-employment process. This is implementing exit interviews, collecting company property, disabling passwords, and security access.
Okay, and so to that point, we're talking about some of the challenges, how insider threats become something that we should be concerned about, but more importantly, how they can be avoided. And so once again, just to reiterate, when we often have policies, but the policies sometimes is not implemented with the right training. So we have training, we'll introduce a policy, we'll talk about policy, and we'll let subordinates and the company know what consequences can come by violation. But we are not doing drills in certain policies. We should sometimes do role plays where we can help individuals become familiar with what certain situations might look like. In other words, training should become a more important part of the process to avoid certain situations. And the others, such as conducting risk assessments, there are tools that are available for that to take place. I'm going to reference later on one of the resources that's out there that you should be familiar with, that offers a great deal of profiling information. These are studies that are done at the federal level, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and also the Department of Homeland Security. And we know that we've got to be careful, because when we go outside of guidelines that have been established and accepted, we could easily be charged with discrimination or prejudiceness. So there are some accepted guidelines to follow when identifying certain characteristics of someone that you may consider a rogue employee. So then these are just some bulleted statements about what characteristics of a rogue employee may be. Someone hypocritical. The individual that appears to be agreeable, but you have known them to have a pattern of really undermining decisions that have been made, even to the extent of sabotage. That lets you know that they're employed, but they're not really interested in seeing the success of the company for whatever reason. And these individuals can become very challenging, if not very threatening, to a company's business. The individual that's the procrastinator, they may express their anger or sabotage projects that they don't see value in. So we talk about being a team player, we talk about synergy, and we talk about these things. But when you identify behavior from an individual that you know is only very pleased when the win-win or the win situation is something that they're directly related to or involved in, and in other instances may be condescending, if not outright challenging and disruptive to other processes or other plans that have gone forth. You want to look out for that, because there's some internal seed there that lets you know that they're not on board with the company for whatever reason, once again. And then individuals can be resentful, insincere, disingenuous. These are all things that you want to make a note of. Now, of course, if these are, in these instances, policies are violated, or there's some written rule that they have somehow violated, then you want to call them in, you want to have a conversation, but you definitely want to document. All too often, we have conversations, we will make a statement in a meeting about someone that may have demonstrated some of these behaviors, and it doesn't go any further than that. And when the time comes for termination or to deal with the situation, you don't have the necessary or the supporting documentation to support that. And so you do want to not just identify these characteristics, but you want to as well document instances where they've been demonstrated or displayed. The others are there as well. Individuals that have a negative attitude, have proven to be untrustworthy, and then just outright devious. They agree to do something that they have no intention of doing. And so these sabotage the workings of a company, and it can certainly have effect on the bottom line. But more importantly, these are the characteristics of individuals that also may have the propensity or the disposition to cause physical bodily harm, if not some other type of sabotage to that company. Next slide. So how do we handle and avoid rogue and passive aggressive behavior in the workplace? Once again, we have to respond assertively and trust your own perceptions. Oftentimes, individuals can become intimidated by the behavior, especially of aggressive persons. And one of the conflict resolution styles is avoid. You know, we get the attitude, well, I'm not going to say anything to him or her. And that only empowers them to do more. So we have to hold them accountable for results, not promises. So individuals, as we stated in the last slide, they're saying, hey, I'll get that done, but they have no intentions of doing it. You can't gloss over that. They are demonstrating a behavior that, once again, can become violent in nature. So hold them accountable for results and not promises. And then communicate your confusion about mixed messages that you may be receiving. So if individual is not consistent with what they're saying, what they're doing, once again, the accountability measure comes into play, because when you identify early what challenges the individuals are displaying, and you act on it early, the behavior quite often can be corrected. And you want to determine, are these behaviors that can be corrected with training, with conversation, with coaching, or are these behaviors that are part of a personality that's set and can only get worse when challenged? And ask questions about the true intent behind the individual's behavior, because once again, the behavior and intent can be masked and misconstrued. And pay attention to what they are doing more than what the individuals are saying. So politely disagree and dismiss suggestions from them that they are somehow being abused, and remind them that it's okay to disagree sometimes. And it's important for us to point that out, because these characteristics, you will find the defense for the person is the victim mentality. So that victim mentality helps them to feel as though they're justified in being disgruntled, justified in not being a team player. And you just might find that there are some things that you can coach, you can train, you can talk about. But if it's unrealistic and you just see that these are things that are not going to change, then you've got to make some other decisions, and sometimes some hard decisions, which may include termination.
Because of the behavior of a rogue employee, even after mitigating the risk, they can still have a negative effect and can be devastating for a business. For instance, Crow reported that almost 3 in 4 data breaches are caused by insiders. 40% of these involved rogue employees. And while 65% of the employees say that they would not sell the information at any price, 25% will sell company data, risking both their jobs and criminal conviction. Also, IBM Security Services, who monitor billions of events each year, revealed that 31.5% of attacks were due to malicious insiders. So sometimes, despite the use of confidentiality agreements and non-compete disclosure agreements, rogue employees still participate in such behavior.
Yeah, and let's also be clear too. Now, we're using the term rogue employees as opposed to the more common term disgruntled employee, because disgruntled, and we've talked about this, can be so general and broad that we don't want it to be construed that the characteristics and behaviors that we just talked about and are talking about is relevant to every case of a disgruntled employee. But the rogue employees have their special place in this category, and these individuals, as in any other situation, they are unbridled, they are not controlled by the policies or by the mission and vision of that organization. So the term rogue is being used here. But you might see a characteristic of a rogue employee through someone who is disgruntled for whether it's a real reason for that you may agree with, or if it's just their perception, because once again, perception becomes the individual's personal reality.
I just want to have a housekeeping note. Feel free to write down any questions. We will have space for that at the end of the presentation. And so earlier we defined rogue employees, some of their characteristics as being dishonest or mischievous. And so the repercussions of employee theft on organizations can be severe. 30% of organizations are forced to close due to internal theft, which takes place in many forms. One of them can be outright theft, larceny, diverting business funds, scheming, taking little by little, where it doesn't appear to be noticeable, tampering with checks and expense reports, just fraud, embezzlement, misuse of customer lists and other secrets. This is theft of intellectual property.
Right. So IP or intellectual property is one that's difficult to guard against, but it can be guarded against at the very onset in terms of the previous webinar that we did, who are you hiring? So who are you hiring? We reference back to that becomes critical, as it is even to the point here. When you have a rogue employee, they've gotten into the company. Sometimes they come in with the same, with the intent that you start to see after a while. And then other times things can happen while or during the course of their employment that turns them rogue. And so you all are HR specialists out there. You are, practitioners, and so we in no wise want to offend you by attempting to educate you on things that we know you are already aware of. But appropriate compensation for employees that are providing the work that they hired to do, good employee packages and things like that. There was a study that just came out that showed 80% of millennials polled said that they have greater job satisfaction when they feel fulfillment on the job and their benefit packages. They, in many instances, once again, 80% said that their benefit package was worth as much to them, if not more to them, than the salary that they were making. And so you have to understand the mindset of individuals that are coming in. But the FBI, according to the FBI, that shrinkage part here is one of the fastest growing crimes in the U.S. Now, you're not going to hear about that because there's no sensationalism in that. It's not a drive-by shooting, it's not a mass shooting, but it is a ramification of a bad hire. When you have individuals that come into your company, when they affect their bottom line, obviously it can affect the rest of the business, and you'll hear some information later that will let you know how many companies are actually being closed because of these potentially bad hires. And the other statistics are here. A quarter, that's 25% of organizations suffered losses of more than $1 million because of employee theft, and more than 37%, more than a third of total theft was committed by a manager. Now, you would suggest that a manager may be someone, typically managers are promoted within companies. And so that manager, he or she, was promoted to that position, but in some way they do not feel that they're compensated appropriately. So they'll feel justified in taking theirs off the top or getting it some other way. So once again, I want to, talk a little bit more about fair compensation. And then 1 in 3 retail employees were arrested for internal theft. As a matter of fact, in the business that we do, AGB Investigative Services, we do know that oftentimes when we're hired to provide officer security, that is man presence in the retail sector, oftentimes it's not for the customers that are coming in, but it is the employees that are stationed there. And so we mentioned earlier that one of the things that we can do is to have physical security present. It's a very real deterrent. So next slide, please. So we continue to see that you can have vindictive employees that can damage your reputation. How so? Well, today, because of the access to social media, the private citizens have as much access to the general public and the general market as do Fortune 100 companies. they can go on social media and get out and get the word out to to millions and millions of people without spending any dollars at all. And we all know that it costs more money to try to correct a problem than it does to eliminate one in the first place or keep it from happening. So this is what these are the challenges that a vindictive employee can cause. They can destroy your brand, products, and even your social profile, because they can publish confidential information, and even if they publish lies or even if they publish things that are untrue, it's still fake news and it's still news. We gravitate toward that which tends to be controversial than those things that are more calming. And so that defamation of your company is another challenge to a bad hire. Then in the opening, we talked about it was mentioned that this discussion and SHRM have accommodated the need for us to have more information about active threat situations. And we say active threat because oftentimes violence and physical safety is not is not as of such where we have to be protected from firearms, but there are many other types of weapons that are used in violence in the workplace, and oftentimes it's even verbal assaults. And verbal assaults are punishable. They are a punishable felony. And this is one thing that I think many companies do not act on. If an individual makes a verbal threat that is practical, one that can be actualized, then that individual should actually be held accountable for that statement. When you have those policies in place and you have that type of commitment to seeing it through, you will find a decrease or a less verbal threats. Let me give you an example of a forcible felony that is an assault by words. If a person said, "I'm going to pull the moon down and crush your head," that's unrealistic. He or she probably cannot grab the moon and pull it down. But if they threaten you and say, are you going to find yourself unable to walk when I get finished with you, or I'll see you outside one of these days and I'll take care of you. That's a verbal threat that can be carried out. It is practical. It should be noted. And in many instances, the law enforcement should be notified. So active threat situations is more than active shooting. According to FBI, there are more than 2 million employees that are victims of workplace violence, and 80% of those active shootings take place in the workplace. Now, we have had, since the Aurora incident here in Illinois, we've had several shootings, unfortunately, even most recent here in Ohio and in Texas. And of course, Walmart is a workplace for many individuals. We may not see it that way, but it is. And so Walmart, they had training. There were guards there that had been trained. They knew what to do. And I think that we should also recognize that there's a need for training our employees as well. Some of you all that are on this call may be familiar with the Department of Homeland Security's Run, Hide, and Fight model, which is taught across the land, and it's very effective training. But there are others, and there are other things to consider. We need to consider that most active shooting situations, or those individuals that are active shooters, once they are confronted, it always ends. It always ends once they're actually confronted, and oftentimes it's the employees or it's the citizens that are present that thwarts the plan of the active shooter or eliminates them as a threat. Let me withdraw the term eliminate, and let's talk more about the thwarting, because eliminating the threat is terminology that is not sexy anymore in law enforcement. So we're just talking about stopping the threat. Okay, we're going to move on. We're moving kind of short on time. Next slide. So we've already talked about some of the active shootings that's taken place, and that there's a slide that we just went past. You can see it, and you'll see where some of these shootings have taken place. But this slide also lists some of those things too. But I want to point out the very last bullet point here, where there are 10 key behaviors in active shooter assailants, including a mental health history and the decision to choose to attack familiar places. So that's huge, because that means that there are assessments that can be done in your hiring process. And then also, it is stated that if you look at the 2018 statistic here, there have been at least 18 mass shootings involving 4 more victims, except for the suspects. So they're on the rise, and these are mass shootings. But out of all mass shootings since 1966, only 27% occurred at workplaces initially. But if you look at the graphs now for active shootings, and if you look at it annually, on an annual basis, the larger part of active shooting events are taking place, and active threat situations are taking place at places of employment. They're taking place in industry. Next slide.
So whenever workplace violence rocks an organization to its core, there are almost always people who then come out of the woodwork remembering prior incidents leading to the tragedy. Unfortunately, some workplace violence can result in fighting, harassment, threats, shootings, or even a fatality. So this lists 7 reasons why employees do not kind of report workplace violence, because they fear retaliation. So employers, it's helpful when we make it clear to employees who report workplace violence that they will support and protect the employee from harassment, retaliation, and even intimidation. And so a lot of employees fear for becoming the office snitch. They feel that they don't want to get the individual in trouble. They don't want to appear to look petty or judgmental or like a goody two-shoe. And so they go against their better judgment and don't report the incident. They may even fear that they will be ostracized by their coworkers, especially if the person in question is very popular among his or her coworkers, or they don't want to get the person in trouble. Oftentimes, they fear for their supervisor's reactions. Employees tell us that they are afraid to report potential workplace violence to their supervisors because they think the supervisor will overreact or think that they are unable to handle their own job responsibilities. And so lack of company policies and procedures, who is the employee supposed to tell? They're supposed to reach out to their supervisors and kind of follow the chain of command. And they lack that because of they lack the knowledge, of how to do that because of the lack of training. So employees also need to have a clear understanding of what workplace violence is, what the warning signs are, and how to handle a potential violent situation. Too many companies institute policies and have employees sign off on those policies, even when there is no real understanding of workplace violence and its severity. So from a safety and liability standpoint, whether it's an in-house training by a qualified expert within the organization or bringing in an outsourced workplace violence expert, the topic must be addressed and reinforced. You wouldn't believe the millions in dollars of differences from the liability standpoint that the proof of quality workplace violence training makes. The 6th one that's listed here is grievances or lawsuits. Some employees are afraid that if they report a potential situation, that they may end up involved in a lawsuit. They weigh the time, the effort that they will have to endure due to the reports against millions of others' responsibilities on their plate, or just what they have going on professionally and personally. So we employees must educate both employees and supervisors that the lack of reporting sometimes and taking responsible actions is more likely to lead into grievances or lawsuits. And lastly, denial. It will all blow over is sometimes what they think, or that's just Joe. Employees often become complacent in dealing with problematic employees or coworkers in the workplace. Someone's bad behavior is just their temperament, or it's falsely believed that the behavior doesn't need to be reported because that's just how they act. So employers must train employees to recognize that this type of behavior is in fact workplace violence and it must be reported.
So those are important to note. Once again, for the sake of time, we're going to keep going here. There's some other information. You can all contact us even after this webinar for more information. But just a word about negligent hiring. Once again, it's a ramification of a bad hire. It's what can happen. Negligent hiring claims are on the rise, and they're becoming very prevalent. As a matter of fact, let's just say what a negligent hiring claim is. A negligent hiring claim is made when the filer believes that the employer should have known about the employee's background of violent behavior. Now, we're going to move forward. So here are just a couple of examples. Now, they're saying that it should have been known by the employee because, once again, it's public record or it's easily accessible. Here are two examples on this slide here where it says an increasing number. All right, so an employee rapes a coworker. On review, it is then discovered that the employee is a registered sex offender, and they actually serve time for a sexual assault. Now, the employee is liable. Why? Because the information was discoverable with effective background checking. Another example, an employee assaults his or her boss. They're sending the woman to the hospital with severe injuries. When reviewed, the employer is found not to have checked employment references, and prior employers were where even superficially the employer would have discovered that the two prior employers would not rehire him. Why? Because the criminal background check would have revealed felony offenses. And so we know that we're doing background checks, but when we don't do them diligently and thorough enough, and we hire individuals where information was discoverable, even though they're accountable for the behavior, that perpetrator can come back and file a lawsuit, and they're winning these lawsuits. So you want to be aware of that. And so there's other information here that you can look through. We want to move forward to how to avoid bad hires. And so after much investigation, the majority of thefts in this particular situation, that was a situation where an individual, they had put certain things into play. Go to the slide right prior to that. Okay, at this example, at a manufacturing company, there was an employer who began measuring product loss, and they were shocked at the amount that was disappearing before it reached the customer. And as a first step, they installed cameras. This was partially successful for stopping the theft, partially. For example, a charitable donation jar that was out of range of the cameras was stolen from a supervisor's desk. Now, this is just a small example of how we are not thorough enough in the systems and the other units that are available. It's not to highlight the idea of a jar of valuables being stolen, but it is to say when we put in security measures, you want to have a consultant that is going to be thorough, and you're not just going to have someone thinking off the top of their head, but call in a professional consultant like an AGB that might be able to provide those types of support and information for you. Okay, and these are obvious reasons that you want to highlight, that you want to implement background checks, and we're pretty sure that you're all doing that, running background checks. So these are different types of background checks and background screenings that can take place. Next slide. They'll reveal the criminal history, drug screening, employment, so forth. So you want to do that, and you want to do them to the extent that the value of your company or the importance that you place on hiring good hires as opposed to bad hires. Next slide. And then there comes that time when it's necessary to have difficult conversations that may even lead to terminations. So what should HR practitioners and managers do? Here are 7 great practices. One is when you have that conversation or you decide to terminate, make sure that the decision is based on facts and not emotions. And so therefore you want to make sure that your decision to terminate is based on a provable fact and is only for business reasons. Because there are a lot of the Department of Labor and human rights claims that are growing when we don't practice this. And make sure everything is well documented, number 2. Make sure everything is well documented and have the meeting in person. It is not recommended that you terminate someone of any other way than in a face-to-face meeting. In that meeting, you should always have security or some other managerial person alerted. Termination should not take place one-to-one. You should always have more than one person available, and in most instances, you should have someone that is prepared to assist or escort that person out of the building, if not off the property. And then be honest, number 4, about your reasoning. Don't sugarcoat it. You have to let them know what behavior has led to that termination. Number 5, have a plan. Once again, know when you're going to terminate, who's going to be present when you terminate, and what's going to take place during that termination process. And studies also show that terminations should be brief. They should not be more than 5 minutes. Once the decision has been made, you already have the plan, and you have the documentation ready and prepared. It's a conversation. It's information given based on a decision that's been made, and it's not a discussion. It's not a negotiation. The longer it goes, the more time we give that person to become hostile. Number 6, be consistent, and that means be consistent with the company's policies, the contracts, and past practices. If a lawsuit is filed, you'll be much better off if you follow a consistent process. The Department of Labor, for termination processes, they want to know 2 things. The policy that you're holding them accountable for. Number 1, is it fair? And number 2, are you consistent? Is someone else or others getting away with the same thing that you're terminating this individual for? Fair and consistent, remember those 2. And then treat the employee with respect. Yes, they're leaving the company, but you're wishing them well. It's just not a good fit for them at the time with this company. So you want to have proper approaches to corrective training. We have some information on important HR partners, and we won't get a chance to get that to you today because of time, but there are some great partners. I mentioned a resource that I wanted to share with you. It's called the National Defense Research Institute, and it's sponsored by RAND, and that's a great publication. It's pretty long and lengthy, and it talks about using behavioral indicators to help detect potential violent acts. It's a review of the science base, and 2 pieces of study that they have in here. One is by the Department of Homeland Security, and they're conducting research on the PHI model, which is the Project Hostile Intent, and then there's the Future Attribute Screening Technology, FAST. And so they're looking at, they've looked at research as early as 2006, 2010, where they are able to offer insight to some of the characteristics that you might look at in terms of behaviors when we're talking about bad hires. And then finally, go ahead with the next slide. So finally, we will just summarize. We've talked about insider threats. Active threats, these individuals that are in the position to actually take matters into their hands. The negligent hiring, which is huge. Once again, you've got to be diligent. You've got to do that research and go the extra mile. Critique, you should revisit your screening process annually because new technology and new opportunities of screening approaches are being made available, which leads us to the next thing that we didn't cover to any great deal, but proper screening have been talked about, and then the importance of human resources with their policies being consistent, being updated, and being executed fairly, as well as training. Everything that happens within that company in terms of even the mission and what we should look for in the behavior of our employees, because the culture of the company should be portrayed from the head down, and when that culture is off, you'll be able to, even the newest employee, once he or she has been there for a while, will be able to notice that someone is just doesn't fit with that company's culture.
Thank you, Dr. Tyler. We do have 15 minutes remaining for question and answer, so feel free to type your questions. I did receive one while you were speaking, Dr. Tyler, and that's, can you customize AGB? Can AGB customize active threat plans for an organization?
Yes, AGB can, and AGB often suggests that customized training be the way to go, because there is no one size fit all. Even in the and we also train on the run, hide, fight model, but even in that model, there are instances where fight should be the first thing that takes place, because running sometimes cannot just get you hurt, but others hurt as well. And we certainly, our hearts and our prayers go out to the victims of these most recent shootings, as in all the other shootings. But some of the evidence shows that when the gunman came in one instance, individuals actually just said, look, they saw him come in with the assault rifle, and they just looked. They didn't do anything. So, certain things happen when you're in panic mode, fight, flight, freeze, or fright. And so, sometimes those things happen. But if you know that physiologically your body will react a certain way, your mind will react a certain way in those situations, you're better off if you're trained on it. And so, yes, we do offer customized training, and not only do we offer it, once again, we recommend it. There are some other models that we have incorporated as well. With the run, hide, fight model, there's also the alert model, and there's the Lockdown International, which we're certified to teach, and that we have certified trainers for that model as well. So you do want to give us a call and have us sit and talk with you about how we can arrange training for you. If you recall, we didn't mention it, but it's on the slide, so you all will get this presentation. 25% of companies that are polled have not had any training at all. And think about this. We haven't had a fire in our schools since 1958, I believe, and that was many children killed right here in Chicago. But yet, and as a result, the codes have changed. Fire alarms have been lowered so that smaller people or shorter people, children, for example, can reach them. We don't build grammar schools more than 2 stories anymore, and I think most are only single-story high. And not only that, there's a drill every year. So by the time a child graduates high school, they've had at least 12 trainings in 12 drills in fires. But yet there have been no lives lost in fires since that one in Chicago many decades ago. And yet we do not offer those same type of drills as a norm in our society, and we should.
We have another question. Do employees being mistreated play a big part in active shooter situations?
So there's no study that have gone to court, or there's no evidence that have gone to court that said a company was liable because of the way they treated an employee. However, you heard me mention earlier that perception is your reality. Regardless of whether it's true or not, if a person perceives a thing, he or she believes that it's real. And that's why your observation of behavior, making sure that you are doing those things that are right. So the best way to know that you're not mistreating an employee is to treat them fairly. make sure that their wages are what they should be. There's no discrimination in pay between genders. There's no discrimination in pay between races. They have fair annual reviews. There are opportunities for advancement. And once again, those good benefit packages are very impressive, especially to millennials.
And the second question is the employer liable for the active shooter incident?
Is the employer liable?
Correct.
So you would have to take that on a case by case basis if the employer was liable. If an employer knew of a situation, and let's just take the employer out of it, let's just say if an individual knew that that was a threat and that was a viable threat that was made, and there was no precautions taken, and there was no warning given, and the individual came back and acted out on that threat, some liability might be levied. We can go back to one of the recent shootings a few years ago, and the security guard is being charged now with negligence because they're saying that the security guard could have and should have gone back into the school. I won't identify which shooting this was, but this is just a situation where he or she, where he should have gone back in but didn't. So he is being charged. The school is not, but the individual is. So that would be a case-by-case situation. It is possible.
Okay. I don't believe we have any more questions, but feel free to contact us directly at agbinvestigative.com, or feel free to give us a phone call at 773-445-4300. Thank you for your time, and I will pass the mic back over to Carol.
Great. Thank you so much. Chicago SHRM wants to thank AGB, Tafer, Anita, and Johnny for the presentation. We really appreciate it today. And thank you all for attending. Watch for our follow-up email for the recertification codes and our link to register for Elevate, our October 10th conference event. I hope to see you there. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.